And we're live. Okay, so we're live like 10 seconds early. I think everyone's probably okay with that. Um, so right off the bat, I'm not feeling 100% today. I'm fine by and large, but not feeling 100%. So we may call this one a little short, um, but we'll see how it goes. You know what happens when I start talking? It may not stop. Um, but you know what? It's been a week, both in the world and life. No point in complaining at all, obviously, but it's interesting. I think God's been dealing with me on a bunch of things. Just where we're going with all of this, what's happening in the world, um, seeing some things. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the future, maybe on a Saturday or even a Sunday. Like I said, I'm working on a sort of like a mission statement, right? So we can really stay on point, stay So we'll be going over that here in a little bit. Also, like I said, I think I can announce it now. I'll go ahead and say it. Um, but I've been working with both the Creation Evidence Museum and Joe Taylor of the Mount Blanco Fossil Museum to create a creation museum in a box. It'll come with, if I was a smarter person, I would have brought my replicas that I got like a couple of years ago. But it's going to be a replica of the London Hammer, a museum quality replica of the London Hammer, and then of the Iron Pot and Coal, right? And it's going to come with a thumb drive that will have an 8-page booklet that you can just print out in black and white, like on your copier, or you can have copies made in color, or you can have one of a number of displays printed. Also, it will have, I think we're still finalizing the number, depends on the printer, um, but 5 8-page full color booklets that explain everything, right? And you can actually hand them out. That's sort of the idea. And I think we're looking at throwing in some trilobites and some other things as well. Um, they should be available mid July. So there's still a few things we need to finalize, but it's going to be, again, the idea is to get these things out so people can see them and actually get some good information on it as well. Um, like I said, I finally finished sort of my part on this, and a lot of this information is also going to get put on the Seru Papers website, which is my thing. I'm going to kind of repurpose that a little bit. I'm trying to streamline a lot of things. I'm going to repurpose that, and there's going to be not just stuff on cryptozoology and creationism in general, but sort of a digital flood museum so people can actually look at the real evidence and see, um, and actually read about the evidence and why the evidence is important. Because the one thing that I really took away from a lot of the work I did for this thing, like it doesn't, like if you were to stop and look at it, you're like, well, there's not a whole lot here. But it's a lot of it was trying to find the perfect thing, and then how to make it make sense. Um, so it's going to be, like I said, that's all going to be there on the website as well. So again, mid July they should be out. We'll have to do them in like sets of 10 because again, these are museum quality replicas that are being done, and those take a little bit of time, but they'll be available. So more to come on that, but I can at least announce it. Um, and like I said, we're working on some things. I will be working on. It'll probably be like a Saturday broadcast, but I'll probably just upload it. Is something again. If we remember what happened last time, start talking about biblical creation. All of a sudden, the internet started going all wonky, right? I don't think that's a coincidence. There's a few things that have happened, so I'm going to do that as its own thing, and I'll do a recording of it and post it so there's no issue. Um, but that's pretty much everything for now. Before we as far as announcements go, but yeah, like I said, I've been thinking about a lot of things, and the Lord's been dealing with me. I'm trying to put everything into a form that makes sense, both for me first. Obviously, I'm trying to make it make sense for me, but then also so something I can share so everyone can see it, right, and have it make sense. In many ways, uh, it's not just a mission statement this channel, what we're trying to do. But I think very much for me personally, what I'm trying to do. I see most of the big parts, but I'm trying to get it squared away. And I hate doing something unless I know I've done it as well as I can do. Sorry. So that may be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I'm still thinking through a few things, but some things have sort of become clear. And I don't mean to be vague. It's just I don't want to kind of throw everything at y'all until I can have it sort of squared away. So that's good as well. So hopefully this will be done by the time August is over. I think a lot of my stuff's going to be off my plate, so I can really focus on this channel. And doesn't mean I'm giving up Texas Front Porch or Danielle. I'm just saying, as far as the thing that's going to take up a lot of my time, as far as ministry is concerned, it is going to be this channel. So there's going to be a lot of fun things happening here. We're going to really try and tie in Ceru papers as well to this, so we can give it as much depth. Like I said, there's also a Facebook page, so if you have Facebook, you can go find us on Facebook. I'll be posting more there in the coming months. And like I said, the one thing I will say is I want us to be a group that lives out loud and provides the best materials for the best conversation that can be had. I think the one thing I can absolutely say is the Christian church has done a very bad job over the last 100 years, 150 years of having really good conversation, right? There's very much this anti-intellectualism, right? And that doesn't mean, to be an intellectual doesn't mean you have to go to seminary and all that. No. What I mean is thinking about things. I think you can be very well educated and still be anti-intellectual. What I mean is, are you willing to actually think about it yourself and work through a thing, or do you just want to be told what the answer is, or at least the answer someone's willing to give you? I think there's a difference there. And I think that's been one of the problems our culture has writ large, is we don't want to think about things. We just want everything spoon-fed to us. And I think it's led for a weaker culture, a weaker church, and that weakness has led to a lot of what we're seeing. So a lot of what this channel is about is having a broader, more in-depth conversation that doesn't shy away from topics, right? A lot of churches, there are things you just can't even say that. Well, exactly. You know what? That's exactly what it is. A lot of churches do want to put God in a box because that's a safer place for him to be than being the God of the universe. We like a God that we can understand. And I think that's why the church has suffered the way it has. And you can't put the infinite power of God in a single box and expect him to fit and expect him to stay put. That's the thing. So again, we're really going to play with this a lot, and it's going to be interesting. But next month, again, we're coming into July. I'd say by the end of August, a lot of this is going to be played out, and we're going to actually see it, right? You know what? Tighten Up just made a great comment, and I think this is something I was even, I have to take mental health breaks during the workday. I think we all do. That was really the thing that occurred to me is, let me just read what Titan said. In fact, let me post it so we can see it, right? And then we'll hit MH 1953. As long as we Christians want to win the argument instead of the person, we will not advance the faith in any way. And I agree with that, right? That's the problem. Is I think we want to be seen as right. We want to win the argument. And that's a short-sighted view. There is a way to be right. I think the way I've always described it is I want to be in the right, meaning I am with the rightness. I believe rightness is independent of me. I'm trying to be on the side of right and be where right is. And I want as many people to come with me as possible, right? I want to get because if God is right, I want to be as close to him as I can. I want as many people to come with me as I can. And I can't do that if I'm focused on me being right. That's it, right? If I'm too concerned with winning the argument, you lose the person. Well, then you haven't won anything of any value, because the only thing that will enter heaven are the souls of those who are saved. That's it in the story. Then that's the thing we need to prepare. That's the thing we need to build for. That's the thing we need to focus on, right? So, in the same way, uh, MH 1953 says the things you treasure are the things you work for yourself, and that's I want to put that in there because that's a great point as well. That's what this channel, a lot of what a lot of what that is sort of the foundation for this channel. I don't believe that God has grandchildren. I think I don't. That's not my phrase. Someone else coined it. Let them have it. Um, it's we have to make it our own. We have to work for it ourselves. We actually have to reach out and process it and work with it. It can't just be handed to you and have any real value. So that's what this channel is about. Again, we don't have to agree on everything. There's the things we need to agree on is God, Jesus' sacrifice and resurrection. The Bible is the inerrant word of God. And again, even that right there has a little flexibility as far as do we I'm not saying that the King James version was handed to us by God. What I'm saying is the original texts are perfect, that they were God breathed, and that His Spirit is overseeing all things. Really, beyond that, everything else is a conversation. We're trying to explore each other, right, with each other. So we can disagree about things, and that's a good thing. I think the biggest problem the church has faced is that we have broken ourselves up over opinions of secondary and tertiary issues. Taste. Well, I don't want an organ in my church. I want a guitar. I want to make certain that my pastor has a cowboy hat. I want my pastor to be called an apostle and wear a $2,000 suit. I think we should not have any instruments. It's on and on and on and on and on. And that's not what the church was supposed to be. We were supposed to be unified in our love for God and then our love for one another at the same time. And yet we keep breaking up over pointless issues of taste. I don't think that taste should separate family. But before we get back into the text that we're going to be reading today, mostly again, yeah, we may cut it a little short. I'm not 100% right now, and some good things are coming. I think by the time August wraps up, we're really going to see it. Right, we're going to see that. So let's open in prayer, and then we'll get to reading Revelations 7 and 8, and I think we can do both today because even though 7 and 8 sort of encompass the vast majority of the trumpets, if not all of them, but I think just the vast majority of them. A lot of that we're going to kind of go through it pretty quick. So we may come back to them again next week, but let's see what we can do with them this week. Heavenly Father, I thank you and I praise you for all that you've done. Father, I just pray that for those who are watching live and those who will watch us on replay, I pray that your hand would be on them, that your spirit would be in them, that you would show them the truth that you want them to walk away with. Father, help the world to know that we are your servants because of our love for one another and our love for those around us. Help us to have the fruit of the Spirit, which is peace, love, joy, patience, kindness. I know it's very easy in the world that we live in today to become frustrated and lose patience and perseverance, to just give it up and say, I'm done. But Father, we need peace and we need patience and we need perseverance so much right now. That's how we're going to make it through. And that's how we're going to have the impact, is if we persevere through it. If there's one thing that I've really learned over the last week, going back over the histories of the last 150 years, is it's evident that we have not persevered in our faith. And that's given so much ground to the devil. And that's why he can do what he can do. Father, speak to our hearts and our minds. And give us the strength to persevere so we can overcome. Help us to speak to the thing that matters the most, the hearts and the minds and souls of those watching and those around us, because that's the only thing that's going to make it into heaven. It's the lives of the people we touch are the only works that will have an eternal value. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. So where are we, right? Tighten up. Actually, you know what? We kind of talked about that earlier. So let me say this I want to be very specific on this. We may need to come up with a different phraseology. You know what? Just for at least for this episode, if I say church, what I mean is the societal system of the church, right? The tangible assembly of human beings. But the thing that has the Spirit of God, I think I'm going to call that the remnant for now. Again, I didn't coin the term. Plenty have had it, right? But I think the remnant is the actual church, those in whom the Holy Spirit has indwelt them, and they are active. That is the remnant, and I think we could say that's also the church. But just to delineate between the system, right, the American church, and the actual church, I'm going to use the word remnant. But I think the church is not dying per se, but it has lost and is very much under attack. And it's, and the thing is, when in fact, I think it's Hosea. I think it is where it talks about how my people die perish for lack of knowledge. If you read it in context, I think we've sort of addressed that in an earlier episode. It's not just that they don't know something. Like we read it as, you're an idiot and that's why you're dying. No, they reject the truth. That's sort of the key thing is that in that verse, the people are they're actively rejecting the truth of God. It's not that they just didn't learn something. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we can obviously say that if you don't learn something, you don't know something that makes you feel prepared, and that hurts you down the line. But in that verse specifically, he is referring to this deliberate rejection of the knowledge of God, and that's what causes them to fail and to falter. And that's what we've done as a culture, right? As a church, we've become seeker sensitive. We don't want to actually stand up for our faith. We don't want to actually explain it. We want to make it comfortable. We want to make it small. We want all of our answers to fit on a bumper sticker. I don't think God fits on a bumper sticker. We can't reject the knowledge, but our culture is rejecting. And so, okay, hold on. Now I'm worried I'm not going to get to here. I kind of want to take a lot of the other stuff out of it for just a second. Was anyone really surprised when they said they want to take down all the stained glass and all the statues of white Jesus? Again, let's take everything else and sort of set this aside. Was anyone really surprised by that? Because if you were, then you weren't paying attention. Because none of this, the statue thing, this is not about what people are stating. When you look at the people who started all this is Marxism. Marxism is about communism. It is about the destruction of the church. They don't want the church to continue. There were, during the Protestant Revolution, particularly in the Netherlands, there was a big push. They're like, we want to get right with God. And so they looked at the Ten Commandments and said, hey, it says we can't have any graven images. They took that as any artwork whatsoever, right? So they went and they destroyed every sculpture, every icon, every painting of Jesus, of the apostles, of anything to do with Scripture. They destroyed it. They painted all of their walls white, and at the back where the rectory and the lecterns were, they painted and carved the Ten Commandments. That's it, right? That's all they had. Okay, that was a desire to get right? That's not what this is. these people who are again, not everyone. I want to take this sort of section, but the people who are calling for the destruction of church art, these are not people who are asking for we want to get right with God kind of a thing. This is something much deeper. This is something much bigger. Again, we're talking about a lot of this later because there's a lot to get involved in. But when they're coming for these things, this is the destruction of the church. There are the people who are behind in any movement at all. There's multiple layers. It's the people who are behind the people that you see that you have to pay attention to and see what they actually want. What do they claim to want? Oftentimes, they won't hide what they really want. There's what they say publicly, but then there's what they will say. And that's when you're like, oh, hold on. This isn't the same thing. You want something else. This is about the destruction of Christianity in many forms. So we cannot reject knowledge. We cannot reject the knowledge of God. We cannot reject knowledge of what's going on around us. We have to take it all in. We have to work through it ourselves. We have to earn it. This is not, like I said, there is a conversation to be had if someone, again, as an artist, this is something I've researched about church history, because there's always this movement of saying, well, graven images, what does that mean? So there are plenty of cultures throughout time that have said, we don't want anything legitimate. If that's what if that's the conclusion you've come to, that's what the Holy Spirit is telling you, go for it. I don't think that's what's happening here. And I certainly don't think that when you read the people who are behind a lot of this, who are the leaders who are organizing everything, you're like, I don't think you're as honest a broker as you claim to be. So, again, am I overly concerned with the statue? No. Every statue, every stained glass window, every building will burn. It's the hearts and minds of the people. It's the souls that make it into eternity. That's what matters, and that has to be our concern. But we also cannot reject knowledge, and we need to be aware of where we are and when we are. That's why I decided to start with Revelation. We need to know the times. Jesus chastised the Pharisees and the Sadducees for not understanding where they were and when they were on God's timeline. Because Jesus is like, the pagans who came and visited me when I was a toddler, they knew what time it was. Why don't y'all? I think it's very important to remember, right? Oh, Titan, let's be honest. None of these things are ever on rail, right? There's just, please. I derail more than Amtrak, and that says something. But it's telling that God came to the shepherds, right? He announced himself. He announced the coming of Jesus to them. But it was the pagan astrologers who knew what was going on. They were like, whoa, we see what's happening. We're paying attention. They were educated. But they weren't so educated that they locked up their minds. They were paying attention. There's a key there. I think that's and we'll talk. Actually, the Magi are going to come up a lot in just a few chapters. Actually, chapter 12, we're going to be we're going to be in chapter 12 for a while. This whole we're going to get through 2 chapters a day kind of thing. That's not going to last. I'm sorry. But the Magi are important. But for now, they absolutely represent this desire. Exactly. Daniel is where okay. Now we're derailed. Actually, I can say this very quickly, then we'll actually jump into the things. Yes, we're going to talk about them more in just a few chapters. But the Magi had all of the writings of Daniel. But more importantly, when you get to the end of the book of Daniel, what's happened? Everyone who opposed Daniel died. Over and over again, we see these Magi, we see these people who are trying to get Daniel executed, end up getting themselves executed. They keep pushing these things. And it's like by the time Daniel's done, he's the last man standing. Well, it's not like that entire system broke down. New people came in. Well, he was the guy everyone looked to. He was important. He kind of reshaped the Magi. His writings, they had all of his writings. The Jews took certain aspects of his writings and they took that back to Israel, and that's where we get Daniel, and then the stories of Bel and the dragon and the Apocrypha, and Susanna and the elders, right? But a lot of Daniel's writings, they had them, and they were also descendants of, at least institutionally, of Daniel. He as Magi, they had his writings, they had his teachings, so they were waiting. They studied the scriptures, and because they had copies of all of the scriptures as well, so they knew what was coming, and they were able to look at Daniel and the calculations that Daniel gives in his prophecies to say, okay, so the Messiah is going to be in Jerusalem on around this point here. So we just need to back it off a little bit and just be like, well, let's be generous. Let's say a 50 to 100 year range is when we need to be looking for something. They didn't know what to look for per se, but they know to look for something. They were looking for something that would tell them the Jewish Messiah had arrived because Daniel had foretold him. Again, as we mentioned earlier, because of what's going to happen in chapter 12, the book of Daniel, book of Revelation are actually intertwined. They are the same book. Daniel describes what Revelation shows. Same thing, right? So there's a lot of interaction between these groups. So, yes, a lot of ultimately, this is all going back to a rejection. Ultimately, whether it was the Sadducees and the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago or today, it comes down to the rejection of truth. If you're going to reject truth, if you're going to reject the teachings and wisdom of God, then things are going to turn badly. Again, now that we've completely Amtracked, the Bible spends a lot of, particularly the Old Testament, spends a lot of time on wisdom, right? Wisdom is very important, and practicality is very important. Not practicality at the cost of beauty, which is a concept we'll talk about later, or practicality at the cost of true knowledge, but again, issues of practicality and wisdom are very important. In many ways, when you reject truth, when you reject God, you end up rejecting true practicality and true wisdom, and so then you end up perishing. Your culture collapses. Your society collapses because Christians are salt and light, and if Christians stop being that salt and light, then everything rots, and that's where we are. The church hasn't been salt and light for a very long time, and what we are seeing is the decay and corruption of our society because we rejected truth. We rejected knowledge. We've rejected wisdom for earthly things. This is the end result. So, well, again, morality is central to knowledge and wisdom. In fact, I would argue that you can't have wisdom without morality, because morality is that outgrowth of understanding the laws of God. If you understand the law of God, then you will understand morality. You can't have one without the other. So it's all intertwined. Again, topics we'll talk. We have plenty of time to talk about them, but we are running out of time to talk about our chapters in Revelation. Okay, so maybe we aren't going to get through all of 7 and 8, but let me talk about them, and then we'll get through what we can. So just to recap, we've gone through the first 6 seals, right? So we went through the first 6 seals. And again, as I argued, the book or the scroll that Jesus is unlocking by breaking these seals is the book sealed by Daniel at the end of his book. Secondly, the seals themselves are actually prophecies. They are not per se. Some people have said, "Well, here's the seal, and then the prophecy that's the vision that John gets is what's written on the text of the scroll." I don't believe that. I think the seals themselves are prophecies that are revealed to John, again, that Daniel had used to seal up that book. And everything from chapter 7, right? So everything from 6:12 through all of chapter 7 is the sixth seal. That's an important point because I want to talk about chapter 8 here in a second. So if everything from basically 6:12 all the way through chapter 7 is the sixth seal, and now we come to the seventh seal, where does the seventh seal end? Now, this is one of those things where I think this is a difference in this is a difference of opinion that may not matter all that much in the long term. The sixth seal, including all of chapter 7, that's important, and we're going to touch on that even later. Because again, we are going to come to a point where I do believe we see the resurrection, which is the rapture, but we see the actual rapture itself, and that ties into that. So that was an important point. But when and where and if the seventh seal ends is less important, but it's an interesting concept. And Mary H, yes, I'm going to put that up there. Hold on. I think that's an excellent way of summing up what I said. We're seeing the result of what we failed to sow. That's it. You can't reap what you didn't sow, and that's what. If you don't sow, then this is what you get, right? Which goes back to the whole salt and light thing. If you're not being a preservative, the culture is not going to be preserved, and therefore you get rot. So, the two thoughts is that in chapter 8, the seventh seal ends at the end of verse 5, right? And then verse 6 begins this new event. So there's, the seventh seal, there's the prophecy, and then they move on. The other thought is that there is no end to the seventh seal. That, as you'll notice, the seventh seal it continues. That the rest of the book is the seventh seal. You'll see a very similar thought with the trumpet, that the seventh trumpet never actually ends. The third woe that is tied into that third trumpet, or seventh trumpet, never ends. That it's everything that occurs with the vials of judgment. So I don't know. I don't know where I fall on that one because I can kind of see it being both, right? I can see how the seventh seal stops at verse 6, 5 or 6, and then they go off and do verse 6 or verse 5, and then they go off and they're doing their other things because John actively, as we will see in chapter 10, he is an active participant in these events. He's not just where this first section he's seeing the prophecies. Soon he's going to be standing there proclaiming prophecies, and we know that he's actually there when New Jerusalem comes down. So I don't know that transition allows them to have been maintained as just all one prophecy, right? That being said, I don't think we can say no to it either. So I'm going to go with I don't know. I do think that it does end, but I think the fact that it's left sort of open-ended a little bit is intentional so that we do kind of see like, okay, we've kind of come full circle now, something else has happened, we're going on. If I had to pick one, though, I'd say it does end in 5. Like, I guess that's what I'm saying. Is if someone has a gun to my head and they're like, you have to come out, it ends or it doesn't, I'm going to come down with it ends at 5. But I think that the ambiguity is also telling us something as well. So 2 things can be true. In fact, 3 things, 5 things, 100 things can be true at the same time because we all live in 3-dimensional space, right? The pyramid is both a series of triangles and a square. So there you go. Take it as you will. So let's actually read at least the 7th seal. And like I said, I'm going to if I have to come down hard, I'm going to say it does end at 5, and then we begin something anew. with the trumpets. But let me actually read it, and then we can go back over it. This is chapter 8. When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And I saw the seven angels who stand before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Then another angel, having a golden censer, came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, and an earthquake. Thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. I'm going to stop right there. Again, if we jump back to the first teaching on this, I point out that I believe, because we see this pattern over again, that's the Battle of Armageddon. That is, it's not just, again, call it the battle, it's the extermination of Armageddon. Let's be honest. Jesus shows up, and it is just, we're done. Like, there's no real fight there. So this is why I think the seal is, there's this silence, right? I think it does end. And what we're seeing is all this other stuff happening. But I can understand the argument that this is all about the trumpets, right? That they're actually kind of taking that step back. Again, if it's me, I think it's just that, and then we move on. But I can see both sides, and I don't know that that both can't simultaneously exist. Let me say it that way. So we go to verse 6 of chapter 8. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound. The first angel sounded, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and a third of the trees was burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. I'll read it, and then we'll come back to it. Then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the water of the rivers and springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. Then the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the stars, so that a third of them were darkened. A third of the day did not shine, and likewise the night. And I looked, and I heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the remaining blasts of the trumpet of the three angels who are about to sound. Okay, so let's start actually at the end, and then we'll jump back to the front here. With the fourth trumpet, we have a third of the sun, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars. We kind of see this event happen later on. In chapter 12, we see a third of the angels of the stars in heaven cast to the earth with Satan by Michael. I am not unconvinced. That's it right there. That's what he's talking about. I think it affects the sun and the moon as well, because there are angels who are over those things. I would not be surprised. Again, I'm not going to break communion with anyone. This is just my personal thought on this verse. But I think that what we have happening here is what we see happening midway through through the tribulation, which means this event right here, just specifically this one event, is happening at the 3.5 year mark, roughly. And that after this is when Satan shows up. Remember, it talks, if you go to chapter 12, it talks about how Satan is cast out having great wrath. I think that's what this is talking about. In the three woes that occur, those are the next three trumpets, which is also important because it kind of goes back into when you get to the seventh trumpet, it never really ends, and there's a lot of woe. How much of that is connected to the judgment that will be poured out, I don't know, but it's there and it's something we got to think about. So again, I would not be entirely surprised if that seventh trumpet, which is, I would argue, the resurrection, is part of this, right? I think I wouldn't be surprised if the vials of judgment that are poured out are that third woe, the earthquake, and that we see happening in chapter 10, as well as uh, the vials being poured on the earth are that third woe. But let's jump back over here. So we'll start again at the first trumpet, right? It just says vegetation struck. And talks, and what's interesting about this, it talks about fire and hail being mingled with blood, and a third of the trees were burned up and all the grass. If you look at, again, I'm not going to say 100% on this one where I am. I don't know that I've fully made up my mind on this aspect either. I think, however, the argument, particularly once we get to the next trumpet, I think it's going to be really, it's going to make a point. I think it's possible for this first seal, or I'm sorry, for this first trumpet to be World War One. Let me explain. World War One used ball ammunition, which are just lead spheres, which again, that looks like hail, and they're about the same size as hail as well. A lot of what was used in World War One wasn't just ball ammunition, but it was 38 caliber ball ammunition. That's about the size of an average hailstone, right? A little bit smaller, at least here in Texas. Like, don't get me wrong, we can get baseball sized and bigger. At that point, it doesn't even look, it just looks like a crystal, right? And those things are absolutely devastating. But the smaller ones, yeah, I mean, they're about the size of the same bullet. So I think we need to take that into consideration. Again, hail, so these spherical things. Fire, that's the firing of the gun, right? Mingled with blood. Well, what happens? The bullet tears through some poor dude's body, and there's blood everywhere. Fire, hail, and blood all mingled together. I am not saying that World War One is the first trumpet, but I am saying that there's a very solid argument to be made that it is. Also, all you have to do is take a look at the French no man's land and just realize all the trees are gone. The grass is gone. Now, does that mean that it's like, well, hold on, if all the trees are gone, then that doesn't fit. And what I mean is, if you look at the photos, the trees are gone. But that wasn't all of the forest or all of the trees in France or even in the area controlled at that time. So I think that kind of still fits, at least for World War One. So again, it's, if you think it's World War One, you don't think it's World War One, the argument can be made, and there's nothing really to say, hey, there's nothing really to say, hey, one way or the other, this is it, until we get to the second one. Because if the second one, which again looks very, very much like what it could, then that may be a thing. Second trumpet. And then the second angel sounded, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea, and a third of the sea became blood, and a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. All right, two important points, and that allows us to sort of say this. It's possible that the second trumpet is World War II. Here's why. Everyone tends to point to this thing that looks like a burning mountain and say, well, that's clearly an asteroid. I think it's important to point out that Tom Horn has prophesied, I think it's in 2029, that there is a massive asteroid that's supposed to hit the west coast of the United States, and basically, it's over, folks. for our side. It still leaves lots of Canada, lots of the east side, the eastern coast of the United States, I believe, uh, southern Mexico, and South America. But that would definitely shift the focus to Israel and Europe and the Middle East. Um, so that is a theory that's been put forward. However, the key here is it talks about a third of the ships are destroyed. It's very specific. And a third of the fish die. A few years ago, I saw a thing for, I think it was on the National Geographic Channel or whatever. I wasn't even watching. I was just kind of coming through, and it was on. I saw it, and it was some sort of a fishing thing. It wasn't Deadly Sketch or anything like that, but it was some sort of like a wildlife fish rescue show, and it had at the very beginning, it just caught my eye. It said a third of all of the species of fish have died since World War II due to overfishing and some other things. I'm like, that's odd. I mean, that's really specific. A third? I mean, that's over 30%. I think it's 33.33, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, that's oddly similar. That stands out. But here's where it gets worse. If Daniel does actually translate Revelation for us, and we know that mountains or large hills are actually nations, then we have to ask the question, was there a nation in the ocean that was on fire in World War II? Well, yeah. And it's not just a nation. It had to be an empire, something that was large, right? This wasn't just some two-bit, third world nation just hanging around. This had to be an empire. Well, Japan was an empire during World War II. It had control, very large control over parts of China, all over the Pacific. They attacked us and crippled us. That's not a small feat. We firebombed Tokyo. More people died in the firebombing of Tokyo than died, I want to say, in both nuclear blasts, but I think definitely Hiroshima. And maybe both combined, but I want to say that definitely Hiroshima, more people died in the firebombings of Tokyo. So what we have is the only nation that's ever had an atomic bomb actually used on it, which, by the way, if you lived 2,000 years ago, how would you describe a mushroom cloud? It's a mountain of fire. But since mountains represent empires, I think there's a clue here. What they're saying is, hey, Japan, it's an empire. We firebombed Tokyo. We dropped 2 atomic bombs on it. It's in the ocean. That matches a lot of what we're seeing. A third of all the fish life that we're aware of have died since World War II. That's odd. But what about the ships, you may ask? Because that's one of the things that we're told. It has to be a third of the ships. Were a third of the ships destroyed? Yeah, they were actually. Literally on the nose, a third of all of the ships, both military and merchant ships that participated in World War II, were destroyed. That's a little on the nose for me. Just to, at the very least, say that it couldn't be true. With a lot of these things, we need to be willing to hold an open hand and say, this fits oddly. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not. But I am saying this does fit. And if this fits, then that does mean World War I is absolutely the first trumpet. If it is true that World War II is the second trumpet, then World War I has to be the first trumpet. There's no way around that one. So, like I said, where you can argue whether or not World War I and the first trumpet actually match up, World War II and the second trumpet match up pretty hard. Again, doesn't mean that they are one and the same, but they match up a little too closely for me to be like, that's nothing there. So now we're going to move on to the third one. Then the third angel sounded, and a great star fell from heaven, burning like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters became wormwood, and many men died from the water because it was made bitter. I'm going to be honest, I don't know. There is a solid argument, a very solid argument, that Chernobyl is wormwood. And let me start with the obvious. And I have absolutely tested. So uh, his name's Baxter Irvin. He's a preacher here in Dallas. Again, I'm in Waxahachie. I think he's in North Dallas. But he's the one who noted the whole 1/3 of the ships thing, right? Like he noticed that a long time ago, and he pointed that out. But he also went and found, he had heard this rumor that the word Chernobyl is actually Ukrainian for wormwood, and it is. I then confirmed it myself when I happened to be related by marriage to a Ukrainian. I asked him, it was my wife's cousin's husband. I'm like, hey, real quick, you're from Ukraine? He goes, yeah, absolutely. And so I asked him, like, does Chernobyl mean wormwood? He goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what it means. It's the same thing. Because wormwood isn't just a name, it is a plant. It's a toxic plant, and but it's often been used medicinally throughout the history. I think also it's somehow connected to licorice, if I were like black licorice, which I believe, if I'm right on that. One of the reasons why I hate black licorice. I'm a cherry guy, always have been. But here's the thing. Because we have a star, which we know are angels coming from heaven, and that's what touches the water. And the waters become bitter and people die from it. That's the part I don't like. Now, if it is Chernobyl, it does bear noting that the isotopes released, the WHO, although how solid they are, but this was from the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, the WHO came out and said, hey, we're going to see a spike in cancer in about 20 years. And the reason, right, is because the isotopes that were emitted in the explosion will actually settle on the earth and in the water, and people will drink that, and then the isotopes are inside them. That will give them cancer in about 20 years. Well, we've seen an explosion of cancer. So, like I said, I'd like to say, well, I don't know that. I think there's a very solid argument to be made that it is, but just as solid, I think it's saying that maybe not. So I'm more 50-50 on this one. I'm kind of 80 or 90% that maybe the first two world wars are absolutely the first two trumpets. It kind of makes a lot of sense. Why wouldn't God talk about the first two world wars? I mean, more people were killed in these wars than in every war fought on planet Earth for all of history. That's a lot of people for God to not talk about. So, but Chernobyl, Wormwood, maybe I'm 60-40, right, on it being the case. Not enough for me. I'm not enough for me to be like, solid bet, put it on Chernobyl, we're solid. So take it for what you will, right? There's a solid argument for it to be the case, but like I said, I can make I can make at least as good an argument that it's not, because the fact that it does talk about it's a star, which is an angel. Again, doesn't mean it doesn't happen, because what was the symbol for the Soviet Union? It was the hammer and sickle, but it was also that big red star, which again China has, again, all the same thing. And that star is actually also Venus, which we'll talk about in the future. So again, kind of 50-50, maybe 60-40 at best, but there you have it. Fourth trumpet. And the fourth angel sounded, and a third of the sun was struck. A third. Oh, never mind. We already talked about this one. So yeah, I think this happens midway through the tribulation. This is Satan getting cast down from heaven. So if that's the case, then the fifth, sixth, and seventh trumpet have to occur in the final third, or the final half of the 7-year period. Remember, there is a 7-year period. The tribulation itself is never once said to be 7 years long, but there is a 7-year period. It's broken by 2 3.5-year periods. It is, if the fourth trumpet does occur in the middle of that, which is the revealing of the Antichrist, it's Satan and his angels being cast to earth by Michael, which we'll see in chapter 12. If that's the case, then everything else that happens afterwards is in that final 3.5 years. So, just put it out there. I'm not saying that it has to be, but again, this is, it's looking really good on this one. So, what is the fifth trumpet? Then the fifth, this is chapter 9. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth. To him, star falls from heaven, and it's a thing that can be called a who, or a him rather, and to him was given the key to the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of that smoke locusts came upon the earth, and to them was given power, and the power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days, men will seek death, and will not find it. They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locusts was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots with many horses running into battle. They had tails like a scorpion, or like scorpions, and there were stings in their tail. Their power was to hurt men 5 months, and they had a king over them, the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. 1 woe is past. Behold, still 2 more woes are coming after these things. Stop there for a second. I think we're going to go a little bit longer today. Yeah. What are these scorpions? Honestly, I think they're the Watchers. If you don't know what that is, we're going to talk about it on Sunday. In fact, let me stop here. I will stop at this one. So we won't get through all of chapter 9, but we'll finish off chapter 9 next week. But here's a good place to stop, because who and what these scorpions are, I think, matter a lot. There's an argument to be made that they are, that John doesn't understand what he's seeing, and there's some sort of virus, right, or a bacteria. Others have said that it's, he's seeing helicopters, and that's what he's kind of seeing. Maybe. But where do they come from? And he says very specifically that there is a star who is given the key to the bottomless pit, and he opens the bottomless pit. And these things are coming out of it. I think they're the Watchers. So who are the Watchers? Where do they come from? We'll get more into what happened on Sunday. So be here for Sunday show. Or if you're watching this recorded and it's like 12 years from now, just click over. Easy. But what the Watchers were, in Genesis 6, it talks about how angels commingled with women and created the Nephilim. Well, the Watchers are named in the book of Enoch as the angels that fell and created the Nephilim. For their crimes, God has them imprisoned by Michael for 70 generations. Now, there's some discrepancy because the version of Enoch we have says 70 generations, but Jude says everlasting chains. I think it is entirely possible that, yes, that Manson, well, okay, hold on. There's some research I'm doing into Manson, and after all of my stuff that I mentioned earlier is done, there's an argument to be made that Manson, yeah, he was crazy, but he was MK Ultra, not just some random crazy dude. Just a thought. Something we can talk about later. That may be that's more of a Texas thing, Texas front porch thing. I'll talk to him about it. But the point is, they were there for 70 generations. I think what Jude is saying when he talks about everlasting chains, I think he means unbreakable chains, because Enoch talks about how they were bound with unbreakable chains. Well, what happens 3.5 years into the tribulation, right? Well, if you jump over back to Daniel, when it says the big angel, which is Michael, who raised his hands, there'll be time, and half time. We see that in Daniel. We're about to see it again in chapter 12, or chapter 10, rather. It plays in chapter 12 as well. We know that's Michael, and it says he stands up. Okay, no big deal. Except the word that we translate as stand up doesn't just mean he stands up. The implication is that he was doing something and he has ceased that action and is standing up, right? We work at desks, most of the time. Back in the day, a lot of things were see Texas down for some Manson talk. Okay, so guys, we're talking about Manson, the possible MK Ultra thing on a future show. But back in the day, a lot of work was done by crouching, right? And you see this in cultures that are less advanced than we are. I don't mind using the word primitive. It's not always about being primitive, though. It's more about wealth. But you'll see it. A lot of people will work, and they'll do it by stooping over. They sort of splay their legs out a little bit, and they're seated, and they're sort of resting on their own legs, and then they're working. That word is what that means, right? It's fine, Urban Grassman. You can always catch it. It's YouTube. We're here forever. But you're working, and then you stop working, and you stand up. That's what the word means. So the question is, what was Michael doing that causes him that he's ceasing his action? Well, the book of Enoch says that he was restraining the Watchers for 70 generations for the time of the end. It sounds like what's happening here, to me at least, right? And here's the conversation. We just said that if that fourth trumpet is halfway there, right? Halfway through, that's the time that Michael stands up and says, time, halftime. Well, so if he's restraining the Watchers, he then stops restraining the Watchers. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. For those who know what I'm talking about. If he stopped restraining them and he goes and fights Satan and then casts him down, might he be like, loser, here's a key. Get your boys. Because I'm done with that. So Satan goes, because most people will say Abaddon, Apollo, that's Satan. Why? Because we know who Apollyon is. Apollyon is Apollo. Same guy. It's still even in English, that's obvious, right? Apollyon, Apollo, same dude, right? Well, Apollo is Baal. It's just another name for Baal. Baal is another name for Satan. Beelzebub. It's all the same being. It's the same deity. So if Abaddon is the devil, or Satan, which is Apollyon, and he's given the keys to the abyss. He opens and unlocks the abyss. Here come the Watchers. But these creatures now, right? They've been tormented for 7,000 years at this point. Probably a bit cranky, but it's like God's like, nope, we've let you out, but you got a job to do. So you get to run around, but here's your limitations, because otherwise you're going back and y'all don't want that. So they go and they do their job. They go and they torment people. That's one interpretation. It's my interpretation. I don't know that it's the right one, but I do think it checks out. I think there's enough there to say, enough things are enough boxes are checked off that it's worth contemplating. So these escaped Watchers are given the job of tormenting humans for a while. But the thing that bothers me, it says death will flee. How is that happening? And not to be macabre, but is it just fleeing those who got stung, or is it fleeing everyone? I could get awkward. It's like, what happened? They were cut in half because they were in a car wreck, and they're not dying. I don't know why. Is it just God's like, hey, death, stop going to people? Or has there been a change? Is it possible that by the time we get to this point, the mark of the beast is changing people's DNA, is keeping them alive, is preventing them from dying? I don't know. It's a theory that we'll explore later on, because there's a lot to that. But what we know is, actually not a heck of a whole lot. All we know is there's an angel that looks like it fell from the stars, or, so again, probably Satan. And he's given the keys to the bottomless pit. He opens the abyss, and out come these things. Me, I'm putting two and two together. I'm saying these are the Watchers from the Book of Enoch. These are the creatures that created the original Nephilim, and they were the ones kind of ruling the world before Noah's flood. So again, I think that goes back to as of the days of Noah. We could argue that they were free, right? Does the days of Noah just mean the days that Noah was alive? Because that also includes the post-flood world as well, right? It does, because Noah survived for quite a while. So does that mean that? In fact, there's some really Trey Smith has some really interesting points about In Merkar being of Sumerian legend may actually be, or let me phrase this: that In Merkar is Nimrod, and Lord Arata is Noah. And that's some wild stuff. We'll talk about that on a later date. So I don't know. Is Noah's day just before the flood and post-flood? Or is Jesus saying, hey, remember that pre-flood world, how weird it was? That's what's coming. In which case, the Watchers being on the earth would be exactly like it was pre-flood. So, again, yes, MH 1953. I think it's potential that at least one kind of the mark changes your DNA. When we come to the mark of the beast, we're going to talk a lot about it. I do think one of them is a chip that will upgrade your DNA to give you psychic powers. I think it will make you a Nephilim, which is why once you've taken it, you're done. There is no redemption for you. Secondly, it also may be why death is fleeing people. They are not dying because they're superhuman now, right? They can't. The stings are tormenting them, but they can't die. It's not bad enough to kill them because their DNA has been upgraded. Those are just some thoughts. I'm not going to die on that hill, but we will talk about it more coming up, because there's a lot there to really unpack, particularly when we talk about the mark of the beast, because there's three. There's not one. There's three, and we don't talk about that. So until then, we're going to talk about it on Sunday. We're going to talk about the Nephilim and the Watchers in their entirety. on Sunday. Um, there's a lot there. I mean, there really is. There's a lot that the church doesn't talk about. I do think, however, we need to be very careful when we talk about the Nephilim, because there are some people who just like everything's about the Nephilim. Well, no, we need to talk about them. The church hasn't really talked about them properly for centuries, but we do need to address them. We do need to put them in their proper place, because they are a key, I will say this, to understanding a lot about the Bible. There's sort of that missing piece that you go, oh, all right, that makes sense now. Now a lot of this stuff actually is like, oh, I get it now. They fit in, they fill very specific holes in theology and in history. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to talk about that on Sunday, and then next week we will come right back to where we were. We're going to talk about the last two trumpets, and honestly, we're going to be there for a little bit because there's some really interesting things that are discussed in the next chapter. So until then, yes, there will be a future Rephaim show. In fact, it'll probably just be on Sunday. But we may do a 11 a.m. Sunday. We may do the Rephaim as a separate show as well, but I think we'll at least touch on them. This Sunday, Nephilim, maybe some Rephaim, and then next Thursday we're gonna get back into the trumpets. There's a lot there. We may be stuck on those trumpets for at least another 2, possibly 3 weeks. So there's a lot there. There's a lot to cover. That's what this is about. Tearing these things apart, figuring them out, making the best of it. So I love every one of you. I pray for every one of you. Let's all remember to be Jesus. We are ambassadors of the kingdom of heaven on earth to those around us. We don't need to go to the Congo or to the Ukraine or to Japan to have an impact for heaven. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, as you are going, proclaim the gospel. Be the apostle and the priest for someone who doesn't know who Jesus is. Okay, one last point, then we'll fuck off. Paul Gould. I'm gonna go back and reread this book. We're talking about this we talked about this on another thing I do for a church that I work with. Although that's by the time their Wednesday night Bible study thing's kind of coming to an end. Once that happens, I'll just be dedicated to this channel. But cultural apologetics, it sort of tears a lot of things apart, right? And it's really, really interesting. I do recommend it. It's very much about this idea that we live, if you're in the United States right now, and really if you live anywhere in the West, we are living in a post-Christian world, and that's what that book's about, right? It's about addressing people from a cultural perspective. It's because a lot of people who are hurt by the church and we need to be Jesus to them. It's not really intellectual problems they have. Like those tend to be the things they throw out there, and certainly they need to be addressed. So yes, regular apologetics is great, but oftentimes they were hurt or they represent a more of a cultural opposition than say an intellectual one, and that book is excellent for it. So be Jesus to a world that needs it, particularly in your neighborhood. Let's build a community of faith together, both here and where you are. You don't need me to have a family of faith wherever you are. And I do recommend this can't be where it stops. Oh, yeah. This can't be where it stops. If there are people who who won't go to church or they feel uncomfortable going to church, put a church in your home. Have them come to your home. Work with them, live with them, worship with them. Let's be Jesus to the world. For those of you who are interested, it's Paul M. Gould, and it's Cultural Apologetics. It's an interesting read. I need to go back and reread it. It's very well done. There's some things I kind of want to digest a little bit more, but it's called Cultural Apologetics. It's definitely worth the read. Until then, I will see y'all on Sunday, if not before. Be good, everyone. Don't you know I have to push like a half dozen buttons to end it, and so I'm over here click, and you're like, is he leaving? Is he not leaving? I'm leaving. Sorry, it just takes forever. Oh, for love of Pete, okay. Now it's like, did you really want to go? Yes, I did. I pushed all the buttons. Yes, I would like to end the broadcast. All right, bye for